Hi, I'm Christine Benz from Morningstar.com, and I'm here at the Morningstar Institutional Conference. Recent research has some sobering implications for couples' financial decision-making processes. Joining me to discuss that topic is John Lynch. He's a professor at the University of Colorado. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Christine.
You have done some really interesting research, and there has been a lot of research done over the past several years about financial literacy education, whether it works, whether it doesn't work. The general takeaway is not encouraging.
It's not encouraging. What the data basically show is that in the first place, the average American consumer is extremely low in financial literacy. So if you give you do a national survey, you'll see very simple questions about compound interest, about the time value of money, et cetera, that most people don't know that stuff. So financial literacy is low.
And then educational efforts to help lift people up in that area haven't necessarily been successful either.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. That's sort of the natural thing, the natural response when you see that the world has become more complicated and people need to be more literate. The natural response is to say, oh, well, we'll fix the problem by financial education. And we've done research that shows depressingly small effects of financial education, that financial education has very, very little effect on financial behavior. And whatever effect it has happens if the education is close in time to the financial behavior you're trying to influence.
So that gets to this idea of what you call just-in-time financial education. Let's talk about what that means and why you think it can be more effective than sort of general interest financial literacy curriculum.
Okay, so when I say this, it's going to sound painfully obvious, but financial education is no different from other forms of education. If you don't use it, it goes away. And so much financial education, for example, school-based financial education, has some sort of broad-based curriculum, and the recipients of that education aren't in a position to use it right away.
They have no money, no assets to invest.
No assets. You might be teaching a high school kid, okay, and of course, here's a mortgage, et cetera. And so what our research shows is that there is no impact of financial education of any length on behavior that's outside of 2 years from when you finish the education. So if you're hoping you're going to teach somebody something that's going to stick with them into adulthood, et cetera, that turns out to be a fantasy.
But if you get a little closer to the point of decision making and you deliver that education at the time when someone is considering their choices, whether they're taking out a mortgage or allocating a 401k, it may have the potential to be a little more effective?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you'll see that if you're looking at the effect of like a 1-hour session on behavior that's taking place within a month compared to having like 15 hours with the person and looking on behavior that's, say, a year down the road, the short session can be just as effective if it's right away. So part of what we think is that to try to identify in people's financial lives specific events where you can be just in time. For example, let's say somebody who's about to retire and they're thinking about the issue of decumulation and thinking about annuities and so on. So that's a point in time where they will be receptive to financial education and financial education embedded in some kind of advice model.
Okay. One angle that you have pursued in your research, I think it's an interesting one for our Morningstar.com audience, is couples' financial planning decisions and the fact that in many couples they divide and conquer the stuff that they need to get done. And so in many households you've got one partner who's the main financial decision maker and the other one is concentrating on other things. Yeah. What implications does that have for that household?
Okay, well, so that's an extremely interesting thing. So first of all, almost everything that's been written about financial education and financial literacy looks at the individual adult as the unit of analysis. So if they're looking at, they're analyzing me, they're saying, John Lynch is this age, he's got this income, et cetera. But the point of this later project is that people are making decisions in a social context, in particular in the couple context. Mm-hmm. And we find these super interesting results. We find in the first place, when couples first get together, the person they'll typically divide up responsibilities for various tasks, including money. And the person who gets the money job is absolutely no more capable than the person who doesn't get the money job. So it's
random.
It's totally random. I wouldn't say random, but I'm sure there are good reasons for it, but it's like, if I'm bad at cooking, then I wind up being the money person, that kind of thing. Or something like that. So the interesting result we find, though, is that once the couple has divided up those responsibilities, whoever is in the, what I'll call the kind of the driver's seat, the financial driver's seat, gets better and better and better over time in financial literacy. And ironically, the person who's in the passenger seat, and by the way, in my marriage, that's me, the longer you're together, the worse and worse, the lower and lower your financial literacy becomes. And then our evidence shows that plays out in ability of individuals to make financial decisions if separated from their partner. So if I've been relying on my wife for close to 40 years here, that over time, even though that seems like it's working well for me when I can rely on her, if I'm on my own, I do worse and worse and worse the longer we're together. And not only do I do badly, but even when I'm in a situation where I have access to really valid information to help me make a particular decision, if I've been in this passenger seat, I'm in a level of ignorance I literally cannot engage with that material. And so I think it's very interesting for people in the financial advising space, for example, about like how do you get through to somebody who has been in that passenger seat for so long, where they literally have a difficult time following and just paying attention to what you're talking about there.
Right. So what are some best practices for couples who are in this situation? And I know anecdotally that it's very common that couples do divide and conquer in this way. How can they help ensure that the one who is not in the driver's seat, that person's skills don't completely go fallow during that period?
Well, it's interesting. I listened to another talk in the conference that Merva Abkhaz gave, and it was about, and she was just mentioning how couples find it aversive to make financial decisions together. So, her point was that people find it easier to divide and conquer. One person will make the decision. But I think if you can make yourself engage, if there's some big decision to be made, collaborate on that kind of thing, then so that both members of the couple completely understand what's going on and why we're doing it and so on. I think that's going to be a positive for people in the long run. Again, our message is as long as the couple's together, the divide and conquer isn't a problem. But since it's quite likely that that marriages end in divorce or death of a partner and so on, eventually the person in the passenger seat is going to be on his own or her own. And so we try to think about what's going to happen then.
Right. And I'd like to discuss that because I know in many situations the couple's answer is, well, he or she will hire an advisor to take things over at that point. But that's not as simple as it sounds, in that the person who hasn't been the financial decision maker may not be well equipped to choose a good advisor.
That's exactly right. So basically, you need to know something to be able to screen and know who really is trustworthy, and also just to understand the advice to be able to act on it. And so if you've been relying on your partner for so long, and now you don't have your partner, so now you're relying on a financial advisor, it doesn't look like that pretty of a picture. I would say that people are definitely at risk of having some disastrous financial decisions in that situation.
So would one idea be for the financially active partner to maybe help pre-screen advisors to identify appropriate advisors in advance?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting angle. One of the angles is also, of course, obviously just what's the compensation model for the advisor and so on. And so, there are compensation models where it's fee only versus some other commission-based thing. So maybe conversations about exactly that if it comes to that situation. Here's the categories of advisors we might prefer over others. But I agree with you. But then beyond that, then there's going to be actual investment decisions and so on. And so, basically, it's I guess one implication is that you can't be you can't say just-in-time financial education for 40 years and then hope that in 40 years now it is just in time. I need to know what I'm doing to talk to my advisor and hope I'm going to catch on right away. I would say there's one positive thing in this is there is some evidence that when partners know that something's about to happen, for example, if they have a partner who's ill and so you know that you're going to be soon on your own, there is evidence that people who've been in the passenger seat kind of up their game and get to the point where they're able to cope more effectively. So I would say that's another implication of this. If you're in a couple and you say it's a health issue or something like that, getting to it later is better than getting to it never. And so
use that as a catalyst to get a little more involved.
Exactly.
John, thank you. Such an important topic. We appreciate you being here to discuss your research.
Thanks so much, Christine. Appreciate it.